The political and religious views contained in these videos represent my own views as an American citizen, whereby I have not originated nor imposed my own private opinions onto my church. Therefore, I have not cooperated with my church to publish them. If they ring true, they must stand on their own. Because the federal government and the state and local governments removed the constitutional protection, because the United States refused to redress the wrongs that were upon the Mormons, Joseph Smith prophesied in the name of the Lord that the Constitution would be overthrown, which makes our nation united. It was first overthrown in the Civil War, and again today, where the deep state in America no longer abides by our Constitution and has overthrown our way of government. The anti-Mormons declare that the overthrow of the constitutional United States was never fulfilled. What do they call the Civil War, when America became a house divided against itself, and the Constitution itself was rejected and denounced? What held the United States together like glue was overthrown, and now at war with its own self. We became a nation divided and not united. So what had united us as one nation under God was overthrown, as Joseph Smith prophesied. But according to Joseph's prophecy on war, another civil war was to happen in our day, where the laws of the Constitution would once again be overthrown by what we now call the deep state. So to make the combination work, do they include the corrupt court judges who legislate secrets of the deep state in order to work against our freedom? Then we include the press, the secret combination that also hides the secret agenda by including lies to divert the public mind into a non-suspicion state. When the federal and state governments refused to grant the Mormons their constitutional rights and allowed their own children to be shot and murdered and their women raped and driven out of their homes to die in the cold, the Constitution was overthrown and non-existent to the Mormons. So this is a lesson in American history that nobody seemed to learn anything from. It could happen to the Mormons. It could happen to anybody. In 1993, military tanks attacked a church in Waco, Texas, and burned women, men, and children alive. Many innocent children were burned alive, but because it was the liberal media and the Clinton administration, the media allowed no sympathy or understanding to be shown to the public. We learned in a congressional hearing that many of the charges were made up and false to justify this attack. We recently saw an entire western town face off with an armed government agency. It was an agency disciplined for war. It came very close to all-out bloodshed. In my estimation, the election of 2016 was all about a second civil war, a cultural civil war where millions of people had recognized that the laws of the Constitution had been overthrown by the deep state. I believe the prophet of the LDS Church prophesied this very event.
I have faith that the Constitution will be saved, prophesied by Joseph Smith. But it will not be saved in Washington. It will be saved by citizens of this nation who love and cherish freedom.
And it would seem prophetically that this has all happened again because America never recognized the constitutional crisis that happened to the Mormons, nor did they correct the wrongs inflicted upon the Mormons. For those graves seen today across the countryside are a witness to the Mormons who were slain. Wherefore the Lord commandeth you, when you shall see these things come among you, that you shall awake to the sense of your awful situation because of that secret combination, or that deep state among you, and the blood of them who have been slain. For they cry from the dust for vengeance upon it, and also upon those who build it up. And the Book of Mormon prophesied, For it cometh to pass that whosoever buildeth it up seeketh to overthrow the freedom of all nations, lands, and countries. And it bringeth to pass the destruction of all people. Ether 8. Surely the prophecies of Joseph Smith make Nostradamus and others look like total amateurs. So regardless if a politician is LDS or he is not, we must ask the question, is he fighting the deep state? Is he defending the Constitution and trying to restore it with all his heart, mind, and strength? Is he in line with what the Book of Mormon teaches? That there is a secret combination seeking to overthrow our country and all other countries? Is it a combination of corrupt law enforcement at the highest levels of the FBI and the State Department, foreign governments, who use the excuse that everything is classified or top secret in order to hide all the secrets of their constitutional controls and crimes. So to make the combination work, do they include the corrupt court judges who legislate secrets of the deep state in order to work against our freedom? Then we include the press, the secret combination that also hides the secret agenda by including lies to divert the public mind into a non-suspicion state. Does the secret combination also include the foreign powers who work to benefit and seize power over our entire country? And the most lethal weapon of all is the leftist education system, which destroys faith in God and patriotism. I submit that the ancient similar model was used to destroy the Nephites, including outside subversion through trade and stealing away the superior advantages and technologies of the Nephites, as well as secretly corrupting them within against their God, the source of their power. Again, an ancient deep state involving corrupt judges and weaponizing of the law enforcement against good people. So just as socialism and communism and their teachings was brought into America by foreign subversives, so likewise did foreign subversives bring in the teachings of the secret combination to defile the Nephites. And the Book of Mormon prophesied, "For it cometh to pass that whosoever buildeth it up seeketh to overthrow the freedom of all nations, lands, and countries, and it bringeth to pass the destruction of all people." Ether 8. Today, we are living through a cultural civil war in America. Today in America, you essentially have two separate medias, like we are two separate nations fighting each other from within. Today you have a rapidly growing youth population who hate America's constitutional government. Today politicians on the left laugh and defy the President and the Congress. They ignore the Constitution of the United States by instituting sanctuary cities and states. They turn illegal alien murderers loose on the street to kill again and again. Joseph Smith clearly prophesied that our constitutional form of government would be overthrown. These people break the laws of the Constitution and nothing happens to them. They steal and sell our uranium and billions of taxpayer dollars and nothing happens to them. They've learned that there are no consequences for ignoring the Constitution anymore. So once again, Joseph Smith's prophecy is absolutely true. Our nation is divided by a cultural civil war happening right now. The Book of Mormon also declares that this abominable system built up by the devil will fall, and great shall be the fall of it. So the prophecies also say that the deep state will have a great fall someday. The Me Too liberals came to Utah to smoke out and expose all the church molesters and the bishop pedophiles in the Latter-day Saint Church. After an exhaustive legal search, however, they failed to find one current case, so they elected to go back 35 years ago and find a guy named Bishop and a 55-year-old female victim. So just like the Judge Kavanaugh case today, if you can't find a crime in the present, you go back 35 years ago and dig one up. Then you go to the media and exploit your accusations as if it was some horrific problem in the Latter-day Saint Church today. You do this to justify your attempt to blame and accuse the most conservative church in the most Republican state in America. Today I want to demonstrate why the church is not hiding sexual abuse. I don't think there's any question that sexual abuse can happen in churches today or in the secular world. Many of you are likely hearing about the court case in the Salt Lake News concerning the 55-year-old woman who claims that she was molested on her mission some 35 years ago, charging that the church covered it all up. I want to explain from my own experience just why the church has no such policy to cover up such allegations. Suggesting that this incident actually occurred, I believe the woman is telling the truth. I personally believe the woman's testimony. I, however, disagree with the charge that the church is covering up for criminals. The suggestion that the church can legally pronounce criminal guilt on a man who denies the criminal charge against himself is a job for the criminal justice system to determine and not for the church to decide. The church officially acts when there's an outright confession of sin. But what if the man will not confess? If the church goes ahead and punishes him and pronounces him guilty, while his constitutional rights declare him innocent until proven guilty, isn't the church breaking his constitutional rights that can only be determined by laws outside the church? It bothers me that the church critics jump to the conclusion that a bishop or a leader in the church is protecting a criminal when he has no authority to prove someone a criminal. The real problem is when this happens in businesses or school or any other church, the victims are often too embarrassed to go public. So hardly anybody thinks about the legal question here. What can the church possibly do when the victims are too embarrassed to go public? They don't want to go to court. They don't want to shame their family, their kids, their parents, and their siblings. They don't want this thing to be exploited in the news. So here's the legal problem for the church. A victim goes to her bishop and she says, "I've been molested by so-and-so." They then interview so-and-so and he denies the charge. It's therefore his word against hers. And the victim then refuses to go to court. The church's hands are tied. What can they do? So here's another legal problem. Let's say that the critics say that the bishop should have the power of discernment to tell whether this man is telling the truth or not. Well, let's say God comes down and tells the bishop that this man is definitely guilty. Well, if the man will not confess, he still deserves his day in court. He has to be proven innocent or guilty in court. The church cannot pronounce guilt on a man even if God tells them. They don't have the civil authority. So taking the church to court for covering up a crime that was never litigated in the courts as a crime makes no sense. It's trying to force the church to admit to something they have no legal power to determine as a crime in the first place. That is why the church attorneys have no choice but to fight this. If they admit to this or give her a payoff, then they're admitting to a criminal conspiracy which they are part of. They can't do that. Anybody with any experience with church courts will tell you when somebody admits to a crime or is convicted, they become excommunicated. It's not like the Pope protecting priests out there who have confessed and have been convicted and still allow them to be priests or practicing priests. It's not the same thing. The part that bothers me about this case is the woman admits that the Me Too movement's influence was the reason she had the courage to take the LDS Church to court. I do not trust the political motivations of the Me Too movement to actually care about women. 80% of that movement and the supporters are hard left. I simply don't support the motivations of that leftist agenda. They refuse to protect the millions of women abused sexually and physically by Middle Eastern Sharia laws. They say nothing about women who are being raped, beaten, and killed without legal recourse. Even in the United States, they support this agenda. I see the left-wing media supporting a porn star, Stormy Daniels, who is certainly not a victim, but obviously a gold digger riding the left-wing wave to glory and political purpose. The left has no problem promoting somebody 20 years ago or something that supposedly happened 20 years ago with no presumption of innocence or guilt. They try a person in the court of public opinion. The left would love to stain the LDS Church with a guilty conviction, even if that guilty conviction was concocted or manufactured by false pretenses. So the charge that the church is covering up abuse is ridiculous. The church has always known it could not possibly resolve serious crimes by itself. I suspect that this allegation has been manufactured to justify their accusing of the church about an abuse cover-up. An alleged cover-up, which is virtually not the real problem at all. The church certainly doesn't want to make itself a criminal abuse cover-up center or a surveillance club of criminality. This is where the case totally goes off the rails here and gets ridiculous. You could literally drive a semi-truck through that whopper of a charge and never hit any truth. So with the liberal courts today, you have to report sexual abuse immediately, whether you're a Baptist minister or a Mormon bishop. But suppose you have a questionable person out there who is possibly lying and has other motives for lying about a criminal charge. A situation arises where clergy is immediately forced by law to maybe send an innocent person to prison. Just like we have troubled kids today who take guns to school and shoot their classmates, you have a whole different breed of kids today who know the laws and will use them literally to blackmail adults by threatening sexual abuse. Because of public hysteria, even the police are under tremendous legal pressure to act and believe every kid who comes forward. There are literally people convicted of this crime today without any evidence other than a vindictive kid's empty charges. A friend of mine spent 5 years in a state prison. We later found out that his own sister had lied about it, and she was covering up for her husband, who actually had done this sexual abuse. She finally admitted this truth on her deathbed with terminal cancer. Years later, the kid admits that his mother had coached him to say that it was his uncle who did this to him in the courts. When there's sexual abuse, it needs to be reported to the authorities. But instead of a man of God helping families sometimes, they become informants of the state. Church and state are now dissolved when it comes to this issue. Sometimes just listening and carefully building a relationship with a troubled kid, over time you can learn why they might be lying to get attention, or whether they're actually telling the truth. If you have to immediately turn in the parent to the police every time you hear about abuse, you risk destroying an innocent person's life or destroying a whole family. They know it's pretty easy to stir up public outrage over abuse. So the anti-Mormons joined with several Christian churches to the Me Too movement to make matters far worse for the constitutional rights of churches, just because they're taught to hate the LDS Church. These deep state operatives behind this movement hope that they can get people so angry and so worked up to a mob-type mentality against the LDS Church that they will collectively strike out blindly and stupidly to the fact that they are just being used by the liberal deep state. So what's truly sad in Salt Lake is you actually see conservative Christians out protesting against the constitutional rights of another conservative church, being blinded by their own biases to support the efforts to help the liberal courts stick it to the LDS Church, forgetting that the same effect will stick it to their own Christian churches. Look what's happened in the news. Right now, the justice system is operating so far outside the Constitution of our country that not even a conservative president of the United States and the Congress can hold them accountable to the constitutional laws of our country. Do you really want to trust them by giving them even more power over religion? Sadly, these conservative Christians are acting just like the liberal protesters we see in Chicago. So we go back to this woman's single ward and her bishop 34 years ago. And he admittedly declared that he did not believe her story, but apparently set her up to see a higher church authority and talk to him. We find out now that the man who abused her in the MTC falsified the abuse story to cause people to question her credibility. How? By claiming that she was the one who approached him sexually. Sexual predators never admit to their abuse. That's one thing the church needs to know, that we all need to know. So from this point on, it's his word against the girls, unless she takes the case to the police or to an attorney at that point. Even if God told the church leader that the man was lying, it still remains a civil matter at that point because he would not confess. Apparently, for over 30 years, she never went to the authorities. It becomes a catch-22 and obviously leaves the church hanging there unless she herself acts on the matter legally to get satisfaction. Recently, this same woman attended the church house on a fast Sunday and got up and spoke and accused this man right in the congregation during church of this sexual crime. In front of 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds and little kids, little primary kids, she was talking about rape and sexual assault. Very inappropriate. There certainly does seem to be a liberalized Me Too agenda out there to attack conservative organizations or churches and make them look bad by associating them with criminals or criminal activity, whether they are directly involved or not. Just like the Supreme Court nominee who's being accused of a crime 35 years ago. He may be innocent, he may be guilty, but still they try him in the public court of opinion. The growing tendency for such people to ambush someone's place of worship or sanctuary in order to promote their own agenda publicly by bringing in television cameras and publicizing a sacred place. Yes, a sacred place, converting a house of God into a place of public accusation. We should all be sympathetic towards people who have been injured or abused. But when we become so insensitive that we ambush a church and we come in there with TV cameras, and we look down there and we see little kids all dressed up for Sunday school with their mothers, innocent people, then we start in on attacking somebody about abuse and rape and all this kind of stuff, having no respect for the innocent, then we've lost our goal. It's a growing disrespect for utilizing unlawful accusations against people by destroying their character. Just think about what this woman is demanding from the church. Wouldn't liberal judges have a heyday if the church started accusing people of sex crimes and demoting them without legal constitutional proof? Boy, they'd come after the church for sure. I believe this 55-year-old woman is telling the truth about her abuse. But I also believe her when she talks about being abused as a child and growing up. In other words, there's a pattern all through her life. In other words, all men are the same. A equals A equals A. There is no B. There is no type of person who is opposite of this evil nature. Everybody gets lumped into the same stereotype. And at this point, it really doesn't matter if they are righteous churchmen or not. They're all the same person. They're all in on it. So you end up going to war against an entire church or against an entire gender just to prove your point. So it's almost impossible to judge such victims. We have to have great and honest understanding. But with that understanding, we need to teach them that they cannot lash out against the innocent. They must understand the perspective in which their problem happened. This false teaching that the first vision of the Father and Son was not put together until many years later after the fact, and they changed the story so many times, has been debunked in Fair Mormon. If you go there, you can see publications that go back as far as 1831 talking about the Father and Son. Therefore, this has been debunked, and the anti-Mormons will not admit it. The account of the first vision was published way back in 1830 in Joseph Smith's own hometown newspaper, and they still won't admit it. The critics simply hope to diminish the power of this event, because when missionaries teach whole families and groups and congregations, the Spirit of the Lord comes down and bears witness in a powerful way that no one can deny it. For millions of people around the world, this could not be faked. It would be impossible for millions of people to have the very same exact spiritual experience. This is a fact that the critics will never be able to explain. I believe the adversary attacks the Joseph Smith story itself. Why? Because when missionaries tell people about this for the first time, this bright light descends down upon them, which is so powerful. It envelops their whole being, both body and soul. This fact defies all scientific understanding when entire groups, both large and small, see the entire room fill up with light, and they all experience the very same manifestation simultaneously. It comes from the outside of these people, directly into their souls. Then the same thing happens around the world, to millions, when the missionaries teach. And it really doesn't matter if it's 10 people or 10,000. You look around and everyone in the room is tearing up. They're all feeling and experiencing the very same spiritual manifestation. Even lifelong Christians will declare openly that they have never felt anything so powerful as this burning in the bosom, which is exclusive to an LDS true conversion to Christ. Christians who know Jesus Christ and are converted to the LDS Church will declare there isn't anything on earth that's even close to this. That spirit touches people powerfully when they hear the words, "I saw two personages whose brightness and glory defy all description, standing above me in the air." And Jesus said to his disciples, "Who say ye that I am?" And Simon Peter answered and said, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered and said, "Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah," or Peter, "for flesh and blood hath not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven revealed it to you." In other words, the only way you could know who Jesus Christ was by revelation from the Father. You could not watch him do miracles and raise the dead, or even read the Bible. You had to get a revelation. And Jesus said, "Upon this rock," revelation, "I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." The rock was revelation, God revealing this to the man. So how does a Christian who's reading his Bible know when he is receiving a revelation from heaven? Luke 24:32 tells you exactly how. And they said to one another concerning Jesus Christ, "Did not our heart burn within us while he talked with us by the way, and while he opened up to us the Scriptures?" Yes, it's the burning in the bosom. The very thing that the anti-Mormons are telling Christians comes from Satan is taught of God and is taught in the Bible. So it's quite remarkable to see these critics walking around Temple Square thinking that they are opposing our church when they are literally opposing what their own Bible says. So right after you plainly show them exactly how someone tricked them about Mormonism being false, they ignore it and go right on as if they never saw it. That's what cult members do. They choose to be blind no matter what happens.
Remember, after ye are reconciled unto God, that it is only through the grace of God that ye are saved. Now, many might think I'm reading from the Bible. This is from 2 Nephi 10 and 24. The Book of Mormon was one time called the Book of Grace because there's so many scriptures about grace in the Book of Mormon, actually more than the New Testament. Back at the old days, the Protestants and other religions used to believe in works, and they kind of attacked us for believing too much in grace. And so that situation is completely reversed now. And so if we remember the Protestant work ethic, they believe that work was also important.
Okay, how about the scripture that says everyone who believes in Jesus Christ will be saved? Belief has nothing to do with works.
Well, I think it does to some degree. Belief, to me, is an action word. If I have faith that I can climb Mount Everest, I'm going to get out there and climb Mount Everest. And if I have faith that I can walk a mile, then in order to prove my faith, I've got to go out and walk. And the same thing with Christ. If I have faith in Christ, then I have to follow Christ in the things that He's asked me to do. And when I follow Him, I'm doing His works and not my own. And see, this is badly misrepresented in many of these twisted theories that other people promote. They confuse people. But actually what we're really doing is following the exact way that the New Testament was laid down.
From history, we can see that the Jews in Germany broke German laws when they lied about being Jews and falsified their own genealogy. When you realize that they did this to avoid having their children and their families burned alive in furnaces, you can see clearly that there were no existing laws to protect them. They had no choice but to lie to protect their race. Critics of the church love to point out that the church leaders lied and broke the law to protect themselves, without giving you the proper context of that history. They purposefully will not tell you that there were no constitutional laws to protect the saints. The governor of the state himself enacted an extermination order to kill the Mormons. Mobs began killing women, men, and children at Hans Mill. Not even the federal government would defend their rights. There simply was no existing laws for the saints to break. The constitutional laws were gone when not even the courts or anyone would enforce them. It was mob rule. In many ways, the church was in the same position as the Jews in World War II. They had to lie or do whatever they could do to save their lives. If Joseph Smith and others would have publicly admitted that they were practicing polygamy, they would likely have been executed. We know from the Bible that Pharaoh was going to kill Abraham if he admitted that Sarah was his wife. So he lied and said she was his sister. Even though Abraham broke the laws of Egypt by lying to Pharaoh, God still protected him. If anti-Mormons had lived at the time of Abraham, they would have used this incident to cause people to leave the faith. There's no question. Peter himself lied to the government officials and told them that he did not know Christ, yet God made him the head of the church. From the book of Abraham, part 7, I show from the Bible itself that Joseph Smith had no choice but to practice polygamy. It was a prophecy that he had to fulfill. There was an ancient law called the Law of Sarah, where the first wife would have to be told or could choose the next wife. This was not true for Joseph Smith. He was exempted from the Law of Sarah. Whether his wife liked it or not, he had to fulfill the prophecy. So please go check out my video number 7 right now. Watch your Bible, scripture by scripture, prove that the bride of Christ is symbolized by Rachel, the first polygamous bride of Jacob in the Old Testament. Watch the links that go back to the book of Revelation perfectly. See why the church in the latter days had to begin with Israelites' polygamy coming back. We remember that Joseph in Egypt was accused of a sex crime with Potiphar's wife, and how Joseph Smith in our day had to be a direct parallel by being accused of sex crimes that he did not do in order to fulfill the prophecy. Historically speaking, frauds and criminals and liars run away as cowards once their own necks are on the line. When their partners and their skins are on the line, the criminal groups break up and they start ratting on each other. But when Joseph found out that he would be killed if he went back to Carthage, his friends told him to run away. He then realized, though, that the mob would attack all of his followers instead. "No, I'm going like a lamb to the slaughter. If my own life has no value to protect my friends, then it has no value to me." He insisted on going alone. Full well knowing that they might die if they went with Joseph Smith, they insisted on going with him. We have men who lost their fortunes, their good name, and were themselves willing to die for the cause. These were brave, good men, and not criminal cowards. The historical truth is unmistakable. They walked right towards their own death, rather than run away from it. The truth is, there are many good people who wholeheartedly believe in something, who may not sacrifice or give everything to that one cause, let alone even think about sacrificing their lives for something they knew was false. Joseph Smith proved over and over again that his devotion to God was more important than his own life. When it comes down to life and death, the frauds run away. Joseph Smith never did run away, even deliberately running to an open window, drawing all the gunfire to himself to save his friends. And just as Jesus says, there is no greater love than he who gives up his own life for his friends. Whether Christians want to admit it or not, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Moses, and all the prophets were polygamous. The entire house of Israel was born from polygamy. That means even Jesus Christ himself was born from a polygamous family through his father David. He, being the son of David, came through a polygamous family. And with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, God found no fault in them. We know that Emma Smith's greatest test in life was accepting polygamy, which she only did for a short time, and then she relapsed. But suppose Rachel and Leah, the wives of Jacob, had all acted like Emma Smith. The entire nation of Israel may never have been born, at least the way God planned it. Jesus Christ himself may never have been born, the son of David. Believers must live by every word that proceedeth forth from the mouth of God. And God gave thee thy master's house, and thy master's wives into thy bosom. In other words, it was the Lord who commanded and gave David his wives in polygamy. 2 Samuel 12 and 8. It was the desire of the Lord that younger widows marry, bear children, and manage the house. He did not want widows to remain unmarried. Give no opportunity to the adversary to speak reproachfully. It was a reproach for a woman to remain unmarried. If any believing man or woman have widows, let them relieve them, and do not the church be burdened, that it may relieve those who are widows. Let the elders who rule well be counted worthy of a double honor. In other words, the elders were to marry these widows, especially those who labor in the word of God and doctrine. 1 Timothy 5 and 16. Those who believe in the Bible and the Lord God must wonder why those who preach from the Bible avoid these scriptures carefully and do not want these brought to your attention. Here we actually see a change being made in the church practice of polygamy. A bishop is different. He must be blameless, the husband of one wife. Here we have elders who are commanded to have more than one wife, and a bishop is commanded to only have one wife. This is a change. Who says there are not changes in the church doctrines? So biblical changes in how the Lord commands polygamy is evident in the Book of Mormon. For in the Book of Mormon, the Nephites were commanded to only have one wife. So obviously in the Bible and the Book of Mormon, from time to time, the Lord changes polygamy laws. So if Joseph Smith was a fraud and wanted to promote polygamy worldwide, he surely would have promoted it in the Book of Mormon, which he did not. Therefore, it is not at all outside biblical laws for the Lord to change polygamy laws like he did in early Utah back to one wife. So anti-Mormons are very much like leftist journalists. They tell you that Joseph Smith done something wrong in order to avoid that these things are a policy of the Bible. So what critics of the church teach is fake news. You get people outraged and angry over absolutely nothing if they were allowed to understand it. So a threat of a class action lawsuit against the church over polygamy will be completely destroyed once people read or watch my Book of Abraham Part 7. Thousands of ministers who try to hide and cover up the subject of polygamy from their own Bibles, and yet charge the Salt Lake Church with a cover-up when it comes to polygamy. So critics of the church want to take the church to court charging that they were hiding polygamy, even though it's always been in church history. All the while, they've been hiding polygamy from their own members in their own Bibles. Quite hypocritical. So just as there is a political deep state trying to destroy our Constitution and our country, so there is a religious deep state trying to destroy the LDS Church and Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith basically admits that the Lord refused to answer him concerning the time of the second coming. I was left with no understanding whether Christ should come later, or I should have to die and see Christ in heaven, or some previous appearing which already happened. I was left not being able to decide anything. So just as there is a political deep state trying to destroy our Constitution and our country, so there is a religious deep state trying to destroy the LDS Church and Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith basically admits that the Lord refused to answer him concerning the time of the second coming. I was left with no understanding whether Christ should come later, or I should have to die and see Christ in heaven, or some previous appearing which already happened. I was left not being able to decide anything. The Lord gives Joseph a hypothetical answer, not a prophecy. If you were to live that long. A big if. That's a question. And then he says, trouble me no more about this. He doesn't want Joseph Smith to ask him any more about this question because he's not going to answer him specifically. So just why would Joseph Smith even ask the Lord this question? Well, the Seventh-day Adventists were screaming to the whole world that Christ was coming in 1844. They stood on hillsides in 1844 all over the world waiting for his advent. They published Daniel's timeline from the Bible, which actually added and counted up to 1844 exactly. So just like everybody else in the world, they added up the numbers from 457 to 1844, which are given in the book of Daniel, and add up precisely. Therefore, it looked like 1844 was going to be a judgment. But what it really was, according to the prophecy, is the restoration of the sanctuary. So it just so happened that 1844 was the exact year that Joseph Smith was martyred and killed to seal the gospel by his death as a testator. No wonder the Lord didn't want to tell him about 1844 and what it meant. Daniel said the sanctuary or the church would be restored in that year. Therefore, Joseph Smith is what the Seventh-day Adventists should have been looking at, the restoration of the gospel, the sanctuary. Instead, they were looking for the second coming of Christ, and they looked silly. You know, I've got to admit that these anti-Mormons had everybody going and fooled by how clever they were, until we finally figured out how they reconstructed his prophecies to appear false. I couldn't sleep, wondering why? Why would these people reconstruct and counterfeit his prophecies to make them appear false? Why were they deliberately hiding what Joseph Smith originally said? Something else that bothers me here, and should bother everybody else. The only reason someone would go that far out of their way to mislead millions of people is if they were actually afraid of something true coming out about Joseph Smith and his mission.